beneath the quiet amber wheat fields of Volgograd, under the roots of ancient, silent pines outside St. Petersburg, and deep within the dark, suffocating swamps of the Volkhov River, millions of heartbeats are frozen in time. They are not merely names written on stone monuments, nor are they abstract statistics safely preserved in dust-covered archives. They are real flesh, real bone, real teeth, and real iron, pressed tight into the cold earth, under the crushing weight of 80 years of silence. Every single year, as the spring thaw softens the soil or the autumn rain washes away the topsoil, the earth gives way. A rusted steel helmet breaks through the mud like an island. A leather boot, preserved by the chemical composition of the bog, emerges with the grey skeleton of a foot still laced tightly inside. A polished zinc identification tag catches a stray beam of sunlight, glinting with the encoded numbers of a unit that ceased to exist in the winter of 1942. To the casual observer, this is a graveyard. To the politician, it is a patriotic symbol. To the black market scavenger, it is a gold mine of sellable militaria. But to the historical forensic investigator, it is a crime scene that has never been properly closed. This reality forces us to confront a heavy, deeply uncomfortable question that divides historians, families, and nations alike. Do we have the moral right to disturb the resting places of the fallen? Does digging up a dead soldier honor his memory by returning his name to history? Or does it violate the ultimate sanctuary of the grave? Where exactly does the line sit between respecting the dead and uncovering the absolute, raw historical truth? The world of battlefield exhumation is a dark, beautiful, and sometimes terrifying space where the living must bargain with the dead. For decades, the official history is written by victorious nations painted World War II in broad, triumphant strokes of grand strategy and clean heroism. But the shovel does not care about propaganda. The shovel does not read textbook chapters. When you dig into the earth of the Eastern Front, the pristine myth of the clean soldier instantly shatters. You find things that governments tried desperately to erase. You find German soldiers who died not from glorious combat, but from eating their own leather belts out of starvation. You find Soviet soldiers buried in mass pits by their own commanders, executed for retreating a single step. You find young boys, barely 16 years old, carrying pocket knives, photographs of smiling mothers and Lucky Charms, buried alongside the very weapons of mass destruction that took their lives. There is a powerful, almost religious taboo against disturbing human remains. Across nearly every culture on Earth, the grave is sacred. We are taught from childhood to let the dead rest in peace. Yet, every summer, hundreds of organized search teams, forensic anthropologists, and historians deliberately drive steel, shovels into the ground to pull these men back into the light of day. They do this because leaving them there means allowing the final victory of war to stand. It means allowing total erasure. When a soldier vanishes into the mud, unrecognized and unaccounted for, he is killed twice. The first death is physical, caused by bullet, shrapnel, or frostbite. The second death is historical, caused by the absolute oblivion of being forgotten. Exhumation is the only weapon we have against that second permanent death. But the process is a moral minefield. With every layer of soil peeled back, the investigator holds the heavy weight of a human life in their hands. Is it right to look into a man's final terrified moments? Is it ethical to expose his shattered skull to a camera lens? When we scrub the mud off a rusted SS badge or a Soviet Red Star, are we preserving history? Or are we feeding an unhealthy obsession with the aesthetics of violence? This is the true story of what happens when the earth is forced to speak. It is the story of the quiet, meticulous, and agonizing work of battlefield archaeology. It is an exploration of the brutal tension between our duty to the dead, who demand silence, and our duty to the living, who demand the truth. To understand why men must dig, one must first understand how so many millions were lost to the geography of the earth in the first place. The Eastern Front of World War II was not a localized conflict. It was an industrial slaughterhouse that stretched across thousands of miles of wilderness, steppe, forest, and ruin. In the chaos of retreats, encirclements, and sudden bombardments, the administrative machinery of death completely broke down. When an army is advancing, it takes the time to bury its dead. It digs neat rows of graves, marks them with wooden crosses or stenciled boards, and logs the coordinates in meticulous field journals. But when an army is routed, or when a position changes hands 5 times in 48 hours, the dead are abandoned exactly where they fell. Consider the pocket of Damiansk, or the vast, bloody cauldron of Stalingrad. In those spaces, thousands of men were instantly vaporized by artillery or buried alive when trenches collapsed under the weight of advancing tanks. Thousands more froze to death in deep foxholes during the brutal sub-zero winters, their bodies turning to solid ice before the snow drifted over them, sealing them away like pale statues until the following spring. When the war ended in 1945, Europe was a continent of ruins and mass displacement. Millions of families were left with a single, agonizing piece of paper from the military bureaucracy that read, "Missing in action." This phrase is perhaps the most cruel sentence ever devised by military administration. It provides no closure, no finality, and no peace. It leaves a permanent, bleeding question mark over generations of a family. Did he die instantly? Did he languish in a Siberian gulag? Did he starve in a transit camp? For 80 years, those question marks have remained buried in the soil. The official statistics tell us that over 2 million German soldiers remain unaccounted for, and upwards of 4 million Soviet soldiers are still missing, scattered across the vast expanses of the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. They are the Phantom Army, a population of ghosts larger than many modern cities, completely integrated into the natural landscape. Over the decades, nature did what it does best. It reclaimed the land. Trees grew through the rib cages of fallen infantrymen. The roots of oaks wrapped themselves tightly around the rusted barrels of Mauser rifles and the buckles of leather equipment. Silt settled in the bottom of bomb craters, turning them into peaceful, stagnant forest ponds. to the untrained eye. A modern forest outside of Vyazma looks like a pristine paradise. But just 6 inches beneath the moss lies a continuous layer of human bone and metal. This is where the conflict between memory and myth begins. During the Soviet era, the narrative of the Great Patriotic War was highly sanitized. The state required a myth of collective, flawless heroism. The reality of millions of unburied, rotting corpses left in the forest did not fit the glorious imagery of bronze monuments and eternal flames. As a result, vast battlefields were intentionally ignored or sealed off. In places like the Second Shock Army's disaster at Mayasnoy Borough, where tens of thousands of Soviet soldiers were cut to pieces in the swamps due to the incompetence of high command, the state chose silence. The dead were left where they lay, treated as potential traitors because they had been surrounded or captured, their names completely scrubbed from official history. Leaving the dead in the ground was not an act of respect. It was an act of political convenience. It was a deliberate strategy of enforced oblivion. When modern search teams enter these spaces today, they are not merely performing archaeological science. They are performing an act of historical defiance. They are forcing the earth to surrender the secrets that powerful regimes tried to bury forever. When a forensic team approaches a potential exhumation site, the romantic notions of history immediately vanish, replaced by the cold, precise reality of archaeological science. The work is slow, physically punishing, and intellectually exhausting. It begins long before a single shovel strikes the dirt. It begins with old maps, aerial reconnaissance photographs taken by the Luftwaffe, after-action reports, and satellite imagery that reveals the faint, geometric outlines of long-forgotten trench systems hidden beneath modern vegetation. Once your site is identified, the field methodology must be flawless. This is not treasure hunting. It is a crime scene investigation where the witnesses died 8 decades ago. The topsoil is cleared away with extreme care, inch by inch, using small hand trowels, brushes, and wooden scrapers. Metal detectors are used continuously, not to find valuable souvenirs, but to track the metallic trail of combat-spent shell casings, shrapnel fragments, and personal gear that indicate the exact position of a body. The way a skeleton lies in the earth tells a highly specific story of their final moments. Forensic anthropologists can read the bones like a text. If the remains are found face down, with limbs drawn inward tightly, it suggests the soldier was cowering in a foxhole, trying to make himself as small as possible to escape an incoming artillery. Perish before the wall collapsed and suffocated him. If the bones are scattered across a wide area, mixed with jagged, torn fragments of steel, it reveals the catastrophic impact of a direct mortar hit. The soil itself acts as both an enemy and an ally to historical truth. In highly acidic pine forests, human bones dissolve completely within a few decades, leaving behind nothing but a dark, ghostly shadow in the earth and a collection of metallic items, buttons, belt buckles, and boot nails that map out where the man once lay. But in the alkaline, waterlogged bogs of the northern sectors, The lack of oxygen creates a bizarre, eerie level of preservation. In these bogs, teams occasionally find what are known as mummies. These are bodies where the skin, hair, clothing, and even internal organs have been preserved by the natural tannins of the swamp. When you clear away the dark, wet peat from such a find, you are suddenly looking at a human face. You can see the stubble on his chin, the expression of terror or exhaustion frozen on his lips, and the fabric of his uniform perfectly intact, down to the colored stitching on his collar tabs. It is a moment that completely paralyzes everyone on the site. The distance between the past and the present instantly evaporates. You are no longer looking at an artifact or a historical subject. You are looking at a person who is alive, who had a name, a voice, and a home, looking back at you across 80 years of lost time. In these profound moments, the ethical weight of the work hits the investigator with immense force. Do we have the right to look at this man? Do we have the right to strip away the protective blanket of the earth that has held him for nearly a century? The justification for this intrusion rests almost entirely on a single vital object, the identification tag. For a German soldier, this was the oval aluminum or zinc Koningsmark, stamped with his unit number and personal roster code, designed to be broken in half upon his death. For a Soviet soldier, especially in the early years of the war, it was the Bakelite capsule, a small black plastic cylinder containing a tightly rolled slip of paper where the soldier was supposed to write his name, home address, and next of kin. These small objects are the holy grail of battlefield exhumation. They are the keys that unlock the prison of anonymity. If an identification tag is found alongside the remains, the cold, anonymous skeleton suddenly transforms back into a human being with a biography. He becomes Joseph Weber, a 21-year-old watchmaker's apprentice from Munich, who loved drawing and hated the cold. He becomes Nikolai Smirnov, a 19-year-old tractor driver from a small village near Kazan, whose mother spent 30 years looking out the window, hoping against all hope that her boy would walk down the dirt road and return home. Without the deliberate act of exhumation, these names would remain lost forever. The science of the soil is the only mechanism capable of translating raw, anonymous human remains back into historical truth. But what happens when that truth is deeply uncomfortable? What happens when the artifact we dig up is not a symbol of a victim, but the emblem of a perpetrator? This brings us directly to the most controversial and highly charged aspect of battlefield archaeology: the identification of insignias and symbols. On the Eastern Front, the ideological nature of the war meant that symbols were not mere decorative uniform additions. They were powerful, explicit statements of political intent, racial theory, and military fanaticism. When a search team clears the mud from a skeleton and reveals a silver skull and crossbones, the Totenkoffer, the runic SS, insignia on a collar tab or steel helmet, the entire atmosphere of the excavation changes instantly. This is no longer just a tragic story of a young life cut short. This is the physical uncovering of an apparatus of terror. Here lies the deep paradox of historical truth versus respect for the dead. Every human being, regardless of the cause they fought for, is arguably entitled to a dignified burial under international law and basic human decency. But history is not neutral. The bones of an SS soldier who participated in the burning of villages, the mass execution of civilians, and the systematic erasure of populations carry a fundamentally different historical weight than the bones of a conscripted farm boy. There is a disturbing trend in modern popular history and digital media that focuses heavily on the aesthetics of these wartime symbols. The internet is filled with forums, video channels, and collectors who romanticize Nazi militaria, obsessing over the design of badges, the quality of uniforms, and the elite status of specific units. When an exhumation video shows the discovery of an SS ring or a rare combat badge, the view counts skyrocket, often accompanied by comments that glorify the German war machine. This is where the duty of the historical investigator becomes critical. The exhumation must never be allowed to become a glorification of the symbol. If you show the silver badge, you must also show the absolute misery that accompanied it. You must show that the man wearing that elite badge died like an animal in a dirt hole, abandoned by his leaders, shivering in rags, surrounded by the physical evidence of his own destruction. True forensic archaeology acts as an aggressive antidote to military romanticism. When you look at the physical reality of an exhumation site, there is no glory. There is only shattered bone, rotted leather, rusted iron, and the terrible smell of wet earth mixed with ancient decay. The glamorous images found in wartime propaganda magazines are completely exposed as a lie by the shovel. Furthermore, the artifacts found alongside these symbols often reveal deep, hidden truths about the nature of the war that the official histories ignore. For instance, in many German graves from 1943 onward, investigators find a massive amount of looted civilian property, women's silver rings, hidden in pocket watches, stolen icons from Russian Orthodox churches, and civilian pocket knives. These items found directly on the bodies of dead soldiers provide undeniable physical proof of the widespread plunder and criminality that defined the daily reality of the advancing German army. On the Soviet side, the iconography reveals its own complex, hidden narratives. For decades, Soviet propaganda maintained that every soldier died with the name of Stalin on his lips, completely devoted to the communist cause. But when you exhume the bodies of Soviet infantrymen, you frequently find a very different reality. Hidden inside their boots, or sewn deep into the linings of their coats to hide them from political officers. Investigators find small handmade brass crosses, handwritten prayers on scraps of paper, and hidden religious icons. These men, facing the absolute terror of industrial warfare, did not find comfort in state ideology. They clung desperately to the forbidden faith of their ancestors. By uncovering these symbols and personal items, exhumation tears down the simplified, cartoonish versions of history taught in classrooms. It replaces propaganda with the complicated, messy, and human reality of the individuals who fought and died. It forces us to see these men not as monolithic icons of good or evil, but as complex human beings caught within a monstrous historical machine. But does exposing this reality justify the physical act of digging them up? To truly understand the ethical debate surrounding this work, we must listen to the voices of those who believe that battlefield exhumation is a fundamental violation of human dignity. This perspective is rooted in a profound ancient philosophy. The grave is a permanent sanctuary, an absolute boundary line that the living have no right to cross. From this point of view, when a soldier dies in battle and is covered by the earth, that location becomes his final resting place. It does not matter if it is a formal military cemetery or a random foxhole in it. Forgotten forest. The ground has accepted him. Over 80 years, he has become a part of the landscape. To drive a shovel into that space, to pull his skeleton out of the dirt, to separate his skull from his ribs, and to spread his bones across a plastic tarp for analysis is seen as an act of profound disrespect. This argument is particularly powerful when it comes to the issue of documentation and media consumption. Today, we live in an era where everything is recorded, shared, and monetized. Many exhumation groups film their excavations for online platforms. When a video displays the skeletal remains of a soldier, his hollow eye socket staring into a camera lens, while an online audience scrolls past, does that honor him? Or does it reduce a human tragedy into clickbait, visual entertainment, and content for consumption? Has the pursuit of historical truth simply become a cover for a morbid digital voyeurism? There are many descendants of missing soldiers who explicitly prefer that their ancestors be left alone. For them, the idea of their grandfather's bones being handled by strangers, measured with calipers, and catalogued in a database is deeply distressing. They find comfort in the idea that their relative rests in the quiet peace of nature, undisturbed by the noise and politics of the modern world. They believe that the earth is the most dignified monument a fallen soldier can ever have. This argument gains even more weight when we look at the commercial side of battlefield scavenging. In Eastern Europe, a massive illegal market exists for wartime relics. These are legal diggers, known colloquially as black archaeologists, care absolutely nothing for history, respect, or identity. They hunt exclusively for medals, helmets, and weapons that can be sold to private collectors on international online auctions. When these black archaeologists find a body, they routinely rip the identification tags from the neck, smash the skull to check for gold teeth, and scatter the remaining bones across the forest floor like garbage. For these scavengers, the dead are simply an obstacle to getting to the valuable metal. The tragic reality is that the tools, techniques, and locations used by legitimate historical search teams are often identical to those used by these criminal grave robbers to the casual observer or the local community. The sight of men in camouflage gear digging deep holes in the forest looks exactly the same, whether they are driven by historical science or financial greed. By normalizing the excavation of battlefields, do legitimate historians inadvertently provide a cover and a justification for the illegal desecration of these graves? This is the core ethical dilemma. The line between a respectful forensic recovery and a disrespectful grave violation is razor thin, dependent entirely on the intent, method, and integrity of the people holding the shovel. If the primary goal is simply to find cool artifacts or create viral content, then it is undeniably a violation of sanctuary. But if the goal is to rescue a human identity from the darkness of oblivion, does that intent transform the act of digging from a violation into a moral necessity? To answer that question, one must look at the profound human impact of a successful identification. When a legitimate forensic team finds a body, the discovery of the physical remains is only the first phase of a massive, exhausting detective story that can take years to resolve. The identification tag or the rolled paper capsule is sent to specialized laboratories, where forensic experts use infrared photography, chemical stabilization, and higher resolution digital scanning to read inscriptions that have been faded or rotted by moisture over 8 decades. If a name, a serial number, or a unit can be successfully decoded, the archival phase begins. Researchers dive deep into military archives, combing through casualty lists, mobilization records, and draft board documents to track down who that specific number belonged to. They look for his date of birth, his hometown, and his family tree. In the modern era, this archival research is increasingly paired with cutting-edge DNA databases, allowing scientists to match genetic material extracted from a tooth or a femur with living relatives who are still searching for answers today. When a match is finally made, the results are nothing short of miraculous. Imagine receiving a phone call in a quiet village in Siberia or a small town in Germany. The voice on the line says, "We have found your uncle. We have found your brother. We have found your father." For 80 years, that man was a ghost. He was a missing person, a source of quiet, generational pain that sat at the edge of every family gathering. His mother died without knowing where her son was buried. His wife grew old and passed away with his fading photograph on her nightstand, forever wondering if he had suffered, or if he was lying in an unmarked pit. By finding his body, identifying his name, and returning his remains to his family, the forensic team is able to close a wound that has been bleeding for nearly a century. They allow the family to hold a proper, dignified funeral, to place his remains in a family plot, and to carve his actual name into a headstone. This is the ultimate justification for battlefield exhumation. It is not about satisfying historical curiosity, nor is it about collecting old iron. It is an act of historical justice and profound human empathy. It is the reclamation of an individual life from the terrifying, anonymous mass of industrial slaughter. Consider the case of a Soviet fighter pilot whose aircraft was shot down in 1942, plunging deep into a peat bog near Murmansk. For decades he was simply listed as missing, a suspected deserter by the paranoid Soviet bureaucracy, leaving his family to live under a cloud of suspicion and shame. When a modern recovery team finally located the crash site, they pulled the preserved cockpit from the swamp, Inside, still at the controls, was the pilot, his identification papers perfectly preserved by the bog water. He was not a traitor. He was a hero who had fought his burning aircraft until the absolute last second to ensure it didn't crash into a nearby village. His identification completely cleared his family's name, transformed his grandchildren's understanding of their own history, and allowed him to be buried with full military honors. If that recovery team had respected the sanctuary of the grave and left that aircraft in the swamp, the historical lie would have stood forever. The family would have continued to live with suspicion, and a brave young man would have remained branded as a coward by default. In this case, the pursuit of historical truth was the only thing capable of delivering true, lasting respect to the dead. The shovel was not a tool of violation. It was an instrument of redemption. Beyond the reclamation of individual names, battlefield, exhumation provides an irreplaceable service to humanity by collecting the physical, unvarnished testimony of the objects themselves. History books are easily manipulated. They are written by the victors, edited by political regimes, and rewritten by successive generations to serve modern political agendas. But an artifact recovered directly from the earth cannot lie. It carries the absolute objective reality of the moment it was buried. When we look at the items recovered from the trenches, we see a history of the war that is completely stripped of grand strategy and political rhetoric. We see the microscopic reality of daily survival and suffering. We find spoon handles that have been sharpened into makeshift knives. We find tobacco tins filled with homemade dice carved from animal bones. We find pocket mirrors where soldiers pasted tiny, cut-out pictures of movie stars or distant girlfriends. These objects reveal that even in the midst of the most brutal, dehumanizing conflict in human history, the individual soldier clung desperately to his humanity. He spent his quiet hours in the trenches, creating art, playing games, and dreaming of home. The earth preserves these fragile expressions of life right alongside the instruments of death. Furthermore, the physical condition of the weapons and equipment found during exhumations provides critical data that dismantles long-standing historical myths. For decades, military historians debated the true reasons for the collapse of the German army at Stalingrad. Was it the brilliant strategy of the Soviet generals, or was it simply the weather? When you look at the exhumations from the Stalingrad pocket, the physical artifacts give you a definitive answer. Investigators find German soldiers whose boots were stuffed with newspapers and straw because their supply lines had completely failed to provide winter gear. They find rifles with empty magazines and cracked firing pins, showing that the men were fighting with completely useless, broken weapons long before the final surrender. The earth reveals that the catastrophe was not just a failure of climate, but a total systemic collapse of military logistics and leadership. On the other hand, the exhumations of Soviet positions from the dark days of 1941 reveal the terrifying reality of the INITIAL Nazi invasion. In these early trenches, Search teams find Soviet soldiers who were completely unequipped for modern warfare. They find men carrying obsolete rifles from the Tsarist era, wearing civilian shoes because there were no boots available, and possessing zero ammunition. Yet the positions of their skeletons show that they stayed in their foxholes, fighting until they were literally crushed into the mud by German armor. These artifacts provide a powerful physical testimony to the immense, unimaginable sacrifice made by ordinary people to stop the advance of fascism. Long before the industrial might of the Soviet factories could properly arm them. If we refuse to dig, if we choose to leave these sites undisturbed, we are choosing to throw away these physical witnesses. We are choosing to rely exclusively on written documents that are often flawed, biased, or intentionally deceptive. The objects pulled from the mud are the final, unalterable court of appeals for historical truth. They stand as a permanent physical barrier against those who wish to deny, minimize, or rewrite the horrific realities of the past. As the practice of battlefield archaeology has grown, it has become deeply intertwined with digital media, bringing a new and highly complex ethical challenge to the forefront: the presence of the camera lens. Today, millions of people around the world watch exhumation videos on digital platforms. This accessibility creates an intense, ongoing conflict between educational documentation and sensationalized entertainment. When a search team brings a camera to an excavation, it can serve a noble, profoundly educational purpose. It allows the public to see the true, unglamorous cost of war. It transforms history from a cold, distant concept into a raw, immediate reality. When a young viewer sees a video of a real skeleton being gently cleared of mud, revealing a shattered skull and a pocket full of letters that will never be read, it carries a pacifist weight that no textbook can ever achieve. It is a graphic, undeniable warning against the dangers of nationalism, militarism, and hatred. But the digital landscape operates on an economic model that thrives on sensation, engagement, and shock value. This creates a dangerous temptation for content creators to prioritize entertainment over historical integrity. When an exhumation video uses overly dramatic theatrical music, or when the presenter handles human bones carelessly to show them to the camera for a dynamic shot, the line of respect is completely crossed. The fallen soldier is no longer being honored as a human being. He is being exploited as a prop for digital engagement. The monetization of these discoveries introduces an even darker element. When a video of a soldier's grave recovery generates ad revenue, who does that money belong to? Is it ethical to profit financially from the discovery of a war grave? Some argue that these funds are necessary to pay for the expensive equipment, fuel, and laboratory work required to continue the excavations and identify the missing. Others argue that any commercialization of human remains is a fundamental violation of funeral ethics and basic human decency. To maintain ethical integrity, legitimate search teams must enforce strict, uncompromising rules for how media is handled on an excavation site. The camera must always function as a silent, respectful observer, never as an active director. Human remains must be treated with the exact same solemnity, dignity, and care that would be given to a modern deceased person in a funeral home. Skeletons should never be displayed in a fragmented, sensationalized manner. Personal belongings, particularly private letters or intimate photographs, must be handled with deep privacy, ensuring that living descendants are consulted before such personal items are broadcast to the world. The objective must always remain clear. We are documenting a tragedy, not filming a show. If the presence of the camera lens increases the chances of identifying the soldier by bringing international attention to his unit or location, then it serves the truth. But if the camera is there simply to capture a dramatic, profitable moment of shock, then it is a clear violation of sanctuary that degrades both the dead and the living. Ultimately, the deep tension between respecting the dead and uncovering historical truth finds its resolution in a powerful concept: the process of final reconciliation. Exhumation is not the final step of the journey. It is merely the catalyst for a grand international process of peace and closure that bridges the gaps between former enemies. When the excavation is finished, the science is complete, and the attempts at individual identification have run their course. The remains of the fallen soldiers are not simply thrown back into a hole or locked away in a museum storage room. They are handed over to official national organizations, such as the German War Graves, Commission Volksbund, or the state commemorative departments of Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. These organizations maintain massive, beautifully designed military cemeteries where the recovered soldiers are laid to rest with full military honors, deep dignity, and permanent care in these vast cities of the dead. Like the massive German cemetery at Rasoshka outside of Volgograd, or the nearby Soviet memorial complex, former enemies lie just a few hundred yards from each other, separated no longer by ideology, hatred, or wire, but united in the absolute equality of death. When a reburial ceremony takes place, it is a profound, deeply moving event. Often elderly veterans, children, and grandchildren from both Germany and Russia stands side by side. Around the open trench, they hold candles, wipe away tears, and lower the small wood coffins into the earth together. In those quiet moments, the political rhetoric that caused the war looks completely hollow. The nationalistic hatreds that drove millions of young men to slaughter each other look like madness. The open grave becomes a space not of division, but of shared, universal human grief and deep reconciliation. If those soldiers had been left in the forgotten trenches, scattered through the dark forests and swamps, this reconciliation could never happen. They would remain frozen in their wartime roles, permanently trapped in the positions of combat, forever representing the unresolved trauma of an unfinished war. By deliberately digging them up, processing their history, and placing them in a formal, recognized cemetery, society performs an act of closing the book. We officially transition the soldier from a casualty of war into a resident of peace. Therefore, the apparent conflict between historical truth and respect for the dead is revealed to be a false dichotomy. True respect for the dead is completely impossible without historical truth. to leave a man forgotten in a swamp, nameless, unrecorded, and abandoned, is the ultimate form of disrespect. It is the continuation of the crime of war across generations. The pursuit of historical truth through forensic exhumation is the only force capable of delivering true, lasting respect to the fallen. It rescues their names from the dark prison of oblivion, corrects the lies of political propaganda, provides profound closure to grieving families, and transforms the scarred, bloody battlefields of the past into permanent sanctuaries of peace and remembrance. The work of the shovel is heavy, difficult, and filled with deep moral challenges. It requires an uncompromising commitment to science, a fierce rejection of military romanticism, and a profound, fundamental reverence for the value of an individual human life. But as long as there are millions of missing souls still calling out from the quiet mud of the Eastern Front, the living have a duty to keep digging. We must continue to push back the topsoil, to clear away the moss, and to look directly into the deep wounds of history. We do this not because we are obsessed with death, but because we are deeply committed to the truth. We do this because the dead have earned the right to be remembered, and the living have earned the right to know. Please write your opinion in the comment box.